Well, it is good to be here with you today. And I got to tell you guys, you do a fantastic job. It's my first time here, and I've never felt so welcome in a church. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because you really make people feel welcome here. When we were driving in today, it was a nice drive. I'm from Stittsville, so it was a little bit a longer drive. We could see the snow on the trees, and it was very beautiful. And then we got to a little side street, and we started chuckling. A few years ago, we started a church, started in our house as a Bible study, became a church, and it grew and grew and grew. And like we had people in the kitchen and the living room. That was where the adults met. The youth were in our piano room. The kids were down in the basement. And we were just running out of space. But the thing that really made us decide, okay, now we got to find a building, we got to move, was one Sunday we were all there, the cars all lined up in the streets, and it was snowing like it was last night. And there was snow everywhere. And then the snow plow came by and plowed around all the cars that were parked on the side of the street and left this huge berm of snow. And then it froze. And we were like, oh, our neighbors are going to hate us. We got to find a place because this is not a good witness to ruin your street so no one can drive on it. And so eventually we found a place. And we've been there for, I don't know, she's melting something, but she knows I can't read lips. 15 years. Well, let me ask you this. How many of you, when you came today, your thoughts and mind were swirling all the way on the way to church? You know, maybe it's that credit card bill that hasn't quite arrived yet, but you know it's coming. Maybe you're still thinking about the Christmas decorations you got to take down, the exhaustion of getting kids back into their routines, or the quiet realization that maybe your New Year's resolution was just a little too much. You know, we tend to hit the morning, hit the ground, and we just go right into sprint mode. December is a marathon, and yet we treat it like we're Usain Bolt's doing the 100-meter sprint, just full out. Shopping, cooking, traveling, family dynamics. And we tell ourselves, I just need to get through the holidays, and then I'll rest. But did you rest? Or did you crash? And now January's here, and the machine is starting up again. You know, modern life is relentless. We move straight from the most wonderful time of the year straight into the most exhausting time of the year without ever even taking a breath. But you know, busyness masquerades as productivity, but often it's just noise in disguise. And we wear it like a badge of honor, but underneath it, it's often just avoidance of our discomfort, of emotion, and of spiritual emptiness. And we've lost the ability simply to be. Did you know the average Canadian checks their phone over 100 times a day? That's once every 10 to 12 minutes. And if you don't believe me, after service, pull up your phone and check your screen time or your digital well-being, and the numbers might scare you. This constant connection comes at a cost, too. It costs the people that are right in front of us. You see, even if we have a no phones on the table at supper rule, just having the phone visible on the table reduces the quality of conversation. There's a word for this, phubbing, phone snubbing, and you're subtly sending a signal to others that your attention's divided, even if you never touch your device. You know, while we're more connected than ever, we've become more anxious, more distracted, and more exhausted. But the smartphone didn't create this. It did turn it into a 24/7 marathon, you know, because we're always on, we're always available, but rarely are we ever fully present. And we think this is a modern problem, and if we assume busyness is just the price of a smartphone, Scripture tells us otherwise. You know, busyness isn't new. Jesus' life was busy. But what Jesus chose in the middle of his busyness might surprise us. So if you feel your life is a non-stop action movie, you're in good company with Jesus, especially in the Gospel of Mark. See, Mark moves fast. He uses the word immediately over 40 times, 11 times in chapter 1. Mark also uses this changing location quickly, just to emphasize the quick pace and the busyness of Jesus. Just listen to this rhythm. Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River, and immediately he comes out of the water, and the Father blesses him. And then immediately the Spirit drives him out into the wilderness. And then immediately he's calling his disciples. And immediately he enters the synagogue, and then immediately a man who is demon-possessed comes to see him and cries out. And then immediately his fame spread everywhere. And then immediately he heals Simon's mother-in-law. River, wilderness, sea, synagogue, house, immediately. Feels like our life, doesn't it? One thing after another, one place after another, with no pause button. But if we look at the end of chapter 1 of Mark, this just isn't any random day. This is like the official launch day of Jesus' public ministry. It's opening day. Mark tells us in verse 32 to 34, he said, "That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and the demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door." That's success, that's momentum, that's ministry going viral. A couple of years ago, Michelle and I had a chance to go to Egypt on a missions trip. And there was one village we went, this was our third day there, it's our last day. We're telling our handlers, we're like, okay, today's the last day. At noon, you can hand out 25 cards. That's all we're going to be able to see in the afternoon. They don't listen. They keep handing out more and more cards, and soon there's a long lineup, but we had to finish at 3. So we're packing up. There's people still out there thinking they're getting in, thinking that something's going to happen. We were doing a medical missions trip, so we had doctors and dentists and vision, and we come out into the courtyard. It was kind of a private school kind of thing and had walls on the outside. And then all of a sudden, people are like banging on the door and pushing it in, and other people are running up on the inside, and they're putting benches and everything to try to keep people out because they're desperate, right? They wanted to see somebody. They wanted to get something. They wanted to have something to make their life better. So I can understand how Jesus might have felt that night when all the village came out and everybody's looking to get healed. Everybody's looking for something from Jesus. But right in the middle of all that, Jesus hits the pause button. See, in Mark 1:35 we read, "Rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." This moment forces us to ask ourselves a question. Why did Jesus withdraw? I asked myself, what would I have done if I was in Jesus' sandals? I probably would have slept in. I worked hard the night before, and I need my sleep if I'm going to be at my best. And then I would have jumped right back into ministry. And that got me thinking about, when do we typically run to the Father? When do we seek him? When do we seek solitude with him? And it's usually when something's going wrong. We're in crisis. We receive a bad diagnosis. The bank account's drained. Our marriage is on the rocks. And we treat prayer like a 911 phone call. We go because we're broken, we're hurt, we're scared. Sometimes we go because we've got a massive decision to make. We're standing at a crossroads. Can we go left? We can go right. And we're like, Lord, I need your direction. Should I take this job? Should we move? Should I marry this person? But when things are going well, we coast. We stop asking, Lord, what do you want? And we start saying, Lord, bless what I'm already doing. It's going well, so we must be doing what's right. But look at Jesus. He didn't withdraw because he was failing. He withdrew when everything was working. The crowds loved him. His ministry was exploding. And that's the danger. See, failure drives us to God, but success often deafens us to him. So Jesus went to a quiet place not to fix a problem, but to commune with his Father. You see, clarity doesn't come from circumstance, it comes from connection. Whoa, the technical gremlins are here. There we go. Because he listened, he knew what came next, even when it meant walking away from success where he was. And you know, almost immediately, that was tested. His alignment was tested. Picture this scene. The sun's coming up. Simon Peter wakes up. The crowds are already gathering, but Jesus is gone. The text implies a frantic search. In fact, the Greek word suggests it was a hunt. He was pursuing Jesus. He was hunting him down. When Peter finds him, he interrupts Jesus' prayer, and he says, "Everyone's looking for you." I'm sure he had a bit of panic in his voice. And I'm sure he was maybe even a little frustrated or upset that Jesus had wandered off when all these people were here to hear him. You know, it sounds like success unless you recognize what it's for. Peter's the campaign manager. He's saying, "Jesus, you're trending. You don't have permission to be offline." Peter is the voice of the urgent. But Jesus responds calmly, "Let us go to the next town, for that is why I came." The urgent said, "Go back." But the quiet place that Jesus had been in, communing with his Father, said, "It's time to move on." And because Jesus had that clarity, he could say no to the good thing, so he could say yes to the God thing. And that's where that tension between the urgent and the present plays out in our lives too. There was a day when both my daughters were much younger. If you have kids, you'll recognize these kinds of days. You know, they're not bad. They're not being bad. They're just being too much. They're everywhere, asking questions, needy, clingy. And Michelle realized, if I don't step away, I'm not going to respond in love. I'm going to react. And so she did the only thing a reasonable parent can do. She went and locked herself in her bedroom. Closed the door, turned the lock. She wasn't hiding. She was taking a time out, which lasted for all of about 12 seconds. And then it was, "Mommy, Mommy, why are you there?" And she said, "I'm in a timeout." And they're like, "Mommy, when are you coming out?" "In a little while. And when I do, we're going to play a sock matching game, and we're going to see who can be the quietest." And you know, somehow that worked. She didn't disappear, though. She paused so she could return present instead of depleted. And that's what Jesus is doing. He wasn't withdrawing from people. He was returning to them whole. You know, and this wasn't just a one-time thing that Jesus did. This was a rhythm that Jesus lived by. See, Jesus modeled a different way. He didn't just do it once. If we look at the Gospels, we see this sacred rhythm of work and withdrawal. In Mark 1:35, we saw it. He rises early to pray in a solitary place. He made it a morning routine. Luke 5:16 says, "But Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and prayed." I love that, the lonely places. So it was his habit to go off by himself to be with his Father. In response to success, after feeding the 5,000, instead of becoming the king like people wanted to make him, he left and went up to a mountainside and prayed. So you see, depending on your translation, the Bible calls this location a lonely place, the wilderness, a remote place, a deserted place. I simply like to think of it as a quiet place. And then Jesus does something remarkable. He invites us into that rhythm, into this quiet place. See, in Mark 6:31, after the disciples had worked hard, so hard, in fact, they didn't even have time to eat, Jesus says to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." This is an invitation, not for monks, not for mystics. It's for exhausted disciples. It's for me, it's for you. Notice specifically how he phrases this, because it changes everything about how we view solitude. First of all, he says, come with me, not go away. He doesn't say go away. He doesn't say, you guys are tired, take a week off and I'll see you when you get back. Sometimes we think taking a break is unspiritual, or that we're abandoning our duty. But Jesus isn't dismissing them, he's inviting them. The call to solitude is not a rejection of work, it's an invitation to relationship. And then he says, with me. You're not to go alone. He says, come with me. You know, we often fear silence because we think that we'll be alone. We think solitude equals isolation. But there's a massive difference. Isolation is being by yourself, and solitude is about being with God. And then Jesus invites us into this quiet place. Jesus is saying, I want you to be where I am. I'm going to the quiet place, and I want you to come with me too. You aren't going there to escape. You're going there to meet and commune with him. And finally, he says, get some rest. You know, he acknowledges our humanity, that we are dust. He knows the adrenaline of launch day and that it wears off and it leaves us empty. So he offers us rest, not as a reward for burnout, but as a rhythm for life. See, solitude is not isolation. Isolation is the absence of things. Solitude is presence, God's presence. And when we accept that invitation, we learn 3 postures that can create space for an encounter. We see silence, that helps us to hear. We see stillness, which allows us to see, and solitude, which creates space for us to meet. See, silence isn't emptiness, it's attentiveness. It's turning down the world's voices to hear the still small voice. My youngest daughter is bird crazy. She's okay with me saying that because she knows she is. And the last couple of years, she's gotten into birding really big. And along the way, she's dragged me into it too. And it's been interesting because as I think about the experience of birding, it's very much relates to silence, stillness, and solitude. See, the first thing we have to do when we go out birding is, at least for me, I have to take my ear pods out because they're in most of the time. I'm always listening to something, and I'm always trying to learn something. If there's a day go by that I didn't learn something, it was a wasted day. And so I drive my wife crazy because I always have a headphone in, and sometimes it's just for silence, and sometimes I'm listening to something. But the first thing we have to do is we have to take them out. We have to suppress the noise that the world has all around us because it's trying to get our attention. And then with the headphones out, well, now my mind starts swirling. I'm thinking about what I got to do today at work, or what I'm doing tomorrow, or what's coming up this week on Sunday, and your brain is swirling. So the next thing you have to do is you have to settle the thoughts in your head. And then you start being able to hear the sounds of nature. And at first, they're just a jumble. There's trees rustling, there's birds singing, there's frogs croaking, there's all kinds of noise. And it's just a lot. You can't pick anything out, you can't really hear too much. But as you listen and as you attune your ears more and more, soon you'll be able to pick out specific bird calls. And you'll be able to say, oh, there's a red cardinal, or oh, there's a chickadee. We should all get chickadees because they just go chickadee-dee-dee. They're the easiest ones, so if you can't catch the chickadee call, then you're in trouble. But you see, that's what silence, stillness, and solitude is like. It's attuning our ears, getting rid of the noise from the world, the noise from our heads, and then just learning how to listen to God. You see, without silence, without learning to listen, our prayers just become a monologue. We're just talking to God when we're not expecting anything to come back. Stillness helps us to learn how to see. Stillness is really about trust. We all know and love that verse, "Be still and know that I am God." And you see, to understand stillness, we need to resist our need to control things. And we need to remind ourselves that God is already at work. It helps us to see that God is present even in the tough seasons or busy seasons of our lives. And then solitude. That's where we go to learn to meet with God. Solitude is the intentional time alone with God. Not loneliness, but presence. Henry Nouwen called it the furnace of transformation, because solitude is not gentle or relaxing at first. It's exposing, it's uncomfortable, but it's refining like a fire that purifies metals. See, the world will offer us substitutes, but they just can't deliver what Jesus is offering us. The world offers polished imitations of silence, stillness, and solitude, but they're often self-focused and spiritually hollow. Instead of silence, we're encouraged to seek me time through spa days and sound baths and things that try to quiet the mind but rarely open our heart to God. And in place of stillness, we're sold relaxation. Temporary escapes like vacation, getaways, or digital detoxes that pause activity, but not our inner striving or anxiety. And look, there's nothing wrong with going on vacation, and it's great to leave your cell phone away. But we need to have a purpose behind doing those things. And instead of true solitude, we're often drawn into isolation, rebranded as self-care, a retreat from people to find ourselves, yet often without that anchoring in God. These things rest our body, but they don't rest our soul. And stillness, silence, and solitude, they're not about escape, they're about encounter. All right, so how do we do this in the real life? I know what you're thinking. This sounds great, but have you seen my January schedule? So I want to offer you some practical advice on things that have helped me with these practices. Before I go there, I just want to acknowledge that for many people, silence is scary, solitude is frustrating, and stillness can feel selfish. Quiet can be uncomfortable because it surfaces things we'd rather avoid. But growth starts in that discomfort. So silence, what do we do there? I recommend start small. If you start tomorrow and you say, I'm going to do an hour of silence, it ain't going to happen. So start your day, start like a 2 to 5 minute thing if this is something you're not used to. Start a little timer, because if you don't, I can tell you what's going to happen. Your brain is going to be like, how long have I been in silence? It must be 2 minutes. It seems like it's 5, so it must be 2. And your brain will go there. That's not what you want. You want to be silent so you can hear God, not thinking about how long you've been there. Use scripture. So after you're done, read some scripture, and then just ask one question. Lord, what are you saying to me? We need to quiet that internal noise. So when thoughts come up, just slowly let them float by and concentrate back on hearing the Lord. And this is one that maybe you don't expect, but expect resistance. It is tough to be silent and sit there. And you'll probably struggle for a couple of weeks if this is not something you do. It's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the easier it becomes. Stillness, that's how we learn to see. We need to reframe our distractions, because we're going to get distracted. When your mind wanders off, don't get frustrated. Just view that not as a failure, but as a chance and an opportunity to return back to the Lord and say once again, Lord, here I am. Your servant is here. Speak. Go for a silent walk. Leave your phone at home. Go without an agenda, and just your only goal is to observe and be present. And release that inner turmoil that you have. Consciously choose to stop planning, stop fixing, stop worrying about things for this set time. And practice noticing. As you're walking, look for something beautiful. Look for what God has created. And it's okay to tell him that he did a good job. It's okay that this sunset is beautiful, and you can tell God you think it's beautiful. See, looking for things that are beautiful, that God has created, it helps us to remember who God is and that he creates beautiful things. In solitude. This is one where often I would schedule God in where he fit. So maybe I was driving home, and so I would say, all right, this is my solitude time. But it works so much better if we pick a regular time and we block that out intentionally. It's like going on a date. What does your spouse or significant other, what do they want to hear? They want to hear, oh, I can squeeze you in next Thursday at 4 o'clock. Or do they want you to clear your schedule for them and make them important? Change your location. Sometimes there's lots of distractions in certain areas, so find a place where you're not distracted, where you can meet God face to face. Manage your tech. This has been a big one for me, and when it fails, I really notice it. So I have my cell phone notifications disabled, and so from about 11 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, I get no notifications. And it's great, because as soon as you see a notification, if it's work, you're thinking about work. If it's something else, you're thinking about that. And it's been a game changer not to have those notifications popping up and setting my mind off. And every once in a while, for some reason, I don't know why it fails. And when it fails and I see those notifications, it really puts me off my morning routine. And so it's been great to do that. And the last thing is, give yourself grace for this process. A friend of mine said in a Bible study we were in, he was like, you know, sometimes we say that I'm going to read the Bible 7 days a week, and I'm going to get through the Bible twice in this year. And his suggestion was to give yourself some margin, because there's going to be days you're going to wake up, going to have a headache, you're not going to feel well, solitude, silence, stillness, they're not going to work. And so if you are very like, I got to do this, it's good to give yourself some grace in that process. So I took his suggestion, and this year, instead of through the Bible in 365 days, I had one that's 314 days. So there's a few days you can miss here and there, and then you don't feel like you're failing, because, you know, you get into Leviticus, Numbers, and sometimes you like maybe skip a day or two, and then the next thing you're a few chapters behind, and then sooner or later it becomes almost an impossible task to catch up. This way, you can miss a few and still feel like you're not failing here. So you know, we're in the season of New Year's resolutions, and you might have made some. Most of the resolutions ask us to do more. Lose weight, save money, work harder. Even our spiritual resolutions often sound the same. Read more, serve more, try harder. But you know, Jesus doesn't begin with effort. He begins with presence. Last week, Pastor Jeff asked an important question. He said, what should we do in 2026? And the answer to this was, seek God's face, not just his favor. That is exactly what Jesus is modeling for us in Mark 1. He doesn't go to this quiet place to get more power, to get more success, or for more momentum. He goes to be with his Father. Not to ask, bless what I'm doing, but to say, align me with what you're doing. You see, seeking God's favor asks, what can you do for me? And seeking God's face asks, who are you calling me to be with. So what if this year you make an unresolution? What if this year your primary goal isn't about accomplishing more, but to be more with him? So, before the crowds gather and before Simon Peter comes knocking on the door or the mummy, why are you in there, comes, before your cell phone notifications start popping up, make a decision, start small, choose one rhythm, and practice it this week. So before we rush back into all the noise, let's pause and listen and hear Jesus' invitation. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. May this year, may we not just seek God's hand, but may we seek his face. God bless.